This session and the previous session, how are they connected? They are deeply and closely connected because the previous session, we talked about security, war, and military issues. And from those perspectives, we were saying that the world is facing danger. And we talked about wars and conflicts in relation to Russia and China. We deepened our understanding and discussion on those fronts. But at the same time, those who are not abiding by rules, the authoritarian regime, in other words, are spreading in the world. As a result, democracy would backslide. That means that simultaneously, military tension, or perhaps even going beyond that, the peace of the world may be sacrificed. So, in other words, we have to observe laws. The countries which abide by laws come together. I think they are like oxygen to keep peace. So in this session, we want to talk about peace and international order to be maintained with oxygen. That is a democracy. However, democracy is backsliding and the authoritarianism is rising. So in that sense, this is connected to a previous session as well. Another point, personally, in relation to this session, since last year, up to now, in total, 20 or so international fora like this. I participated in those. And I thought there are two things related to this session. And of course, panelists will explain later on. One is in 1930s, particularly in 1938. In other words, in that year, Hitler invaded a part of Czechoslovakia, and that was accepted internationally. That is the appeasement of Chamberlain or Munich. And from that point onward, World War II started. And then 3 years later, Japan launched attack on Pearl Harbor. So in the short span of 3 years, World War advanced very quickly. That means from 3 years from now, perhaps things will be happening compared to what we are actually thinking of now. That is one point. And secondly, Africa, in the Middle East, and India, if we go to international conferences in those global South countries, and I participated in those conferences several times, and in such a forum, people say that democracy is necessary and democracy is right thing. However, that is the view on our side. However, this is not actually shared by global South countries. So I would like to take up this point in this session and how we confront these issues, because they are important issues. Now, firstly, let me proceed in this way. Let me explain how we are going to proceed. The first round, I am going to ask the questions. Already, I asked in advance to each panelist. So within 4 minutes, panelists will respond to my previously given questions. And then the second round will be the follow-up questions from my part. And if possible, I would like to take up questions from the floor after. So please think about what you want to ask. In the previous session, we didn't have time to entertain questions from the floor because of the time constraint. Therefore, we have Ambassador McFall, Professor Tsuruoka available here with us now. Therefore, if you have questions regarding the previous session, if you have questions to those two speakers, you can use the opportunity later on. Now, without further ado, and before that, I would like to introduce the speakers, and I am sure that you have bio data of the speaker. Therefore, briefly, let me give you the title of the speakers. To my left, Professor Tsutsui, who is Stanford Sociology Department, and International Comparison and Human Rights and the States is the title of his book, and he received an award. And Ms. Professor Kasuya the professor at Faculty of Law of Keio University in the Netherlands. She received a bachelor's degree and master's degree, and then received a PhD from California University, and international comparison of politics and regime movement is her area of specialty. And we have Professor Gi Wok-shin, professor of sociology at Stanford, and nationalism and democracy, international relations. Broad study is conducted by him from the international historical comparative view. And the last speaker is Professor Hosoya of Keio University. He is the expert on the European history, and also he participates in the advisory boards of the Ministry of Defense of Japan too. He is very active on a broad basis. The first round, we talk about the backsliding of democracy in the world, overall picture on that, and also what are the challenges and risks in relation to that issue. In the second round, I am going to ask you what we have to do about this. First, let me go to Professor Tsutsui. My name is Tsutsui. Thank you very much. I was asked to speak in Japanese. I have to say that the panelists are very fluent in English, and some of them are better in English, but I asked the panelists to speak in Japanese. Because we have a simultaneous interpreter, please speak slowly. Now, first of all, regarding this session, I would like to express my appreciation to Mr. Kato. Thank you for inviting me, and also Professor Mori of Keio University. And Keio, NIKKEI, Stanford, and the leaders of these institutions, I have been able to have a good dialogue, and I appreciate this opportunity. And people from Obayashi, thank you for supporting this event. And Stanford Japan Center President Banno, thank you for cooperating with us. 4 minutes only. Let me be brief. Now, crisis of democracy. I think you hear this phrase quite often nowadays. So to what extent are we facing a crisis of democracy? I want to show you the graph. Thank you. If you look at it, this is a VDEM. That is the source of the information, VDEM. And as we often talk about crisis of democracy now, since 2008 or so, democracy scores have been declining in this way. And that part is enlarged so that you can see better. However, since 1900, to this century, please look at the evolution or change. Gradually, in 1940s, the score declined significantly. However, from that point onward, steadily, we saw the increase of scores in 2000 and in the middle of 2000s, and decline started. So democratic recession is the word often used, and backsliding as democracy is taking place. Truly. From the historical perspective, we often talk about crisis of democracy, but I don't think we should emphasize too much the crisis of democracy. And that is my view nowadays, because why this historical perspective is important. There are threefold. One is, for the past 15 years or so, democracy declined or stagnated. Why is that? There are problems within the democratic countries, populism and division of societies, typically as we see in the US, but in Korea too, we see division. So democracy is not functioning very well. During the pandemic, we saw this failure of democracy. People come together and listen to each other and make a decision. However, decision-making is so slow, and authoritarian regimes are quicker in coming up with countermeasures and decisions clearly and quickly. And the delivery of policies, the authoritarian countries saw results. Because China grew economically very well, those who want to have a good standard of life, in the past, democracy was better because we had successful cases in Europe and the US. These are all democratic countries. However, this period has come to almost an end, and even countries which are not democratic countries are able to succeed economically. Therefore, the package of democracy and economic growth is not the only solution. There could be a package of autocracy and economic growth. And authoritarian governments have increased the popularity, and we have to fight for that as a democratic countries. I think that is the major reason for democratic stagnation that we see recently. And regarding democratic backsliding, which started around 2000, already up to that point, 0.5 or so score dropped. In 1930s and 1940s, it started from 0.1. Therefore, democratic institution was not established fully, and then fascism appeared, and then democracy stumbled quickly. However, we can't be complacent today, but now we have institutional guardrails to prevent the democracy from backsliding within the country or internationally. We have such institutions, and that is why during the 4 years of Trump administration, the democracy didn't collapse completely. Of course, we see still a lingering effect of Trump administration today, but in various other countries too, there are institutional guardrails compared to the past. Therefore, we have to be cautious, but we shouldn't be complacent, but we still have some time available. And not only domestic issues, but also internationally, like-minded countries, namely democracy, should work together and to protect each other. They can provide advice to other democratic countries. So international solidarity is stronger compared to the past. And also, we have to be careful because solidarity among authoritarian countries is rising as well. The international liberal order, a backbone, namely the US, and also the UK exited from the EU, but we are worried. But I think the UK is resurging now. But the US, which has been a backbone of democracy, is becoming weaker. So other countries have to come together to protect democratic institutions. And I think Japan can play a big role in this regard. I come back to this point later on. But there are the reasons for democratic backsliding in relation to economic growth. And even the countries which are not democratic countries can grow economically. Therefore, we have to, on the democracy side, we have to work harder. And also, secondly, the starting point is not that weak today compared to the 1930s or so. But even so, we have to work harder. And also, thirdly, the democracy is based on groups. And Japan can play a role in a group of democratic countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we should not be too pessimistic. But on the other hand, we should also be calm and prepared in response. So that was a well-balanced observation. Now, may I now turn to Professor Kasuya. Professor Tsutsui has mentioned about the backsliding democracy. I'm sure you have your own analyses on this, so I would like to hear your take on this question. And in order to prevent democracy to regress, what may be the important role of election? What kind of measures could we take? Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Kasuya Yuko is my name. My area of specialty is Southeast Asia regime movement, focus on Asian countries. The domestic politics of these countries is my focus. Professor Tsutsui talked about macro historical analysis. So from my perspective, I would like to dive into micro domestic issues of countries and also focusing on the past few years. Firstly, in this round, what I want to say is recently we talk about democratic backsliding. But in Asia-Pacific region, the countries with democratic backsliding, they can be categorized into three groups. The first type is that where democracy declined. However, U-shape recovery is being made. Therefore, this is a good news. The level of democracy is improving. The case in point is Brazil. In 2022, President Bolsonaro lost the election and ruler came to power, and democracy scores have improved since then. Rule of law and also the freedom of media, these scores have been improving. In Poland as well, I think this can happen in Poland too, according to some data available recently. The second type is democracy backslid, and then at that low level, the situation continues. That is to say, democratic stagnation. That is a case in the Philippines. In 2016 through 2022, as you know, the President Duterte, Asia's Trump, in other words, decreased democracy level. In 2022, President Marcos took office. And after that, the outright human rights violation or the destruction of democracy are not occurring. However, in the Philippines, the democracy is not improving just like in Brazil. Therefore, democracy is stagnating. The third type is the most concerning pattern. Democracy decline, and this declining trend is continuing. So democracy level is regressing. In other words, in the case of Asia, India, Hong Kong, and more recently, actually, South Korea recently, since 2020, the democracy scores have been declining. So Indo-Pacific democracy backsliding are grouped into three categories in this way. This is the first point I wanted to make. And secondly, Mr. Akita pointed out the role of election. As you know, in 2024, it is billed as election year. India, the Philippines, and Taiwan, there have been elections. And I don't have time to go into details, but the election result of India in protecting democracy, I think we have seen some positive signs in the Indian election. To be more specific, the Modi administration itself is sustained. However, the BJP led by Modi, so the party couldn't have a single party majority. Therefore, coalition will be placed, and we have to see how it evolves. Therefore, the more moderate politics can be expected because that new government have to also pay attention to the voices of coalition partners. Through voters, democracy can be protected in this way. That has been seen in Asia. So this is all at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. When we speak of backsliding of democracy, you have the continuous decline as well as the U-shape, the the birth, so to speak. Brazil, the Poland, the Philippines, everyone is going through the election. So the role of election was also pointed out. I hope that we can have a discussion later as well. May I now turn to Professor Shin? Now, the three professors in Japan have discussed on backsliding democracy. So, Professor Shin, you are looking at nationalism, democracy, and international relationship especially on the Korean Peninsula. So looking at the global trend of democracy, what is your view on this? And if you could also touch upon external factors, China, Russia, their propaganda, all the information warfare going on, and what may be the impact and consequences of that? If you could also touch upon these as well, please.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here today. So regarding some influence from Russia, China, or other authoritarian states on liberal democracy, okay, let me start with a quote from my friend in Mongolia, okay, who's running for a parliament. So as you may know, Mongolia will have elections this Friday. So it's coming up. And actually, I got this message last week, so it's very recent. And to avoid identity of the person, I'll just say he or she, okay? Basically saying that, strong influence, I'm just quoting, okay? Strong influence from Russia like never before. I am being bullied by police every day, cannot even get out of my house or come home without fear. If Mongolian People's Party rules again, I am not sure if I could remain here even if I wish so. So this is a really depressing message from my friend in Mongolia right now running for the election. And we know that Russia interfered in the U.S. election in 2016. And also, we know that China has been quite active in interfering in elections in Taiwan. And even in Korea, there's allegation. I just say it's an allegation because I don't think it's proven yet. Allegation that China is trying to influence election outcome, and they are doing a lot of misinformation campaign. So these are only some examples that really worry me these days. So I think Keio mentioned briefly, but also the moderator mentioned what happened in 1938 and 1941. So let's go back to 1930s and 1940s. And liberal democracy was challenged by fascism and communism. I mean, we know that Germany, Soviet Union, and others. And at the time, United States and United Kingdom, they provided leadership to defend liberal democracy from the threat of fascism and communism. But now let me pose your question. Is there any country right now who can provide global leadership to defend and preserve liberal democracy? We talked about United States already, and I don't think I can say with confidence that U.S. can defend liberal democracy. I don't see any leader in Europe either, and I don't see anyone in Asia. As you mentioned now, India also moving towards authoritarian politics. But on the other hand, as you already talked about, Putin, Xi Jinping, maybe even Modi, they are actually coming close together to strengthen their authoritarian regime and possibly even influencing in other countries. Here in Japan, maybe US and also in Europe, we have election and changing leaders. But whether you like it or not, we may have to live with Putin, Xi Jinping for maybe 10 more years, maybe even longer. So what are you going to do? Especially, I think their influence in the Asia-Pacific region is very strong. It's likely to increase. So here we are talking about crisis in liberal democracy, But I'd like to add that or emphasize that we are having crisis in global leadership to defend our liberal democracy. So once again, in the past, U.S. and U.K. were able to provide the leadership and won. But now I'm less optimistic. So let me pose a question: what are you gonna do? How we can restore or recover global leadership to promote liberal democracy in the face of challenges and threats from authoritarian leaders led by China, Russia, and so on. So let me stop here. Then happy to have some discussions. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。今の
Thank you very much. In the world, the guardian of democracy kind of country, 1930s, the UK and the US, the Japan, German axis arose, and they could not serve as a bulwark of democracy. And Professor Hosoya, if possible, I would like to ask you to answer the question raised by Professor Gyu-ok-shin, and then the global south, a lot of population are living in global south, and these countries are not necessarily favoring a democratic institution. So to these countries, how could we approach? So including that question as well.
はい、秋田さんありがとうございます。
Thank you for the question, Mr. Akita. My name is Hosoya from Keio University. Firstly, I have shown we have established Keio's strategic center, the Keio Center for Strategy. So Professor Tsuruoka and Professor Mori are also leading this center. And this time we were able to work in concert with Stanford University and Nikkei Forum. I am truly delighted to have this symposium today, and I would also like to thank all the audience who have come to participate. Now, Mr. Akita has asked a question. At the outset, there was a comparison of the situation back in 1930s and right now. Whether democracy will be able to recover or revive or not. This is co-authored by myself and my colleagues, the Japanese experts on the security matters. We are comparing what are the similarities with the situation back in 1930s or 1920s. If there's an analogy, what happened during the 1930s? The regression of democracy then could also happen. And after the rise of populism, what happened? There was a world war. So if the situation right now continues, another world war could erupt. So what are the similarities and what are the differences is something we need to study. Talking about similarities, one thing is the economic backsliding. In the 1930s, there was a Great Depression, and there was the world financial crisis after the global water crisis in 2008 and 2009. So there seems to be a lot of dissatisfaction accumulating. So for liberalism and democracy, many people who are searching for alternatives, the different way of thinking. So that could be one analogy we could draw from the situation back in 1930s. BRICS is being spoken frequently these days. In 2008, when the global financial crisis happened, China has pulled the whole global economy to recovery. And many developing economies have looked to China, not to the United States or Europe or Japan, because all those countries were on decline, but rather they were turning their eyes to China because China was doing very well. That was the propaganda. And many countries actually have believed this propaganda. Back in 1930s, Nazism was able to rise because of their propaganda of the failure of capitalism. And also communism was thought to be superior over capitalism. That is another analogy. And thirdly, nationalism and populism are being strengthened in every country. So they would be reluctant to collaborate with the other countries rather than cooperating. Many countries have withdrawn within their own country and economy and tried to not to work with the other countries. And Nazism and communism and fascism have happened from a global movement. But today, the America First may have also generated from the situation where people who were having affinity with such fascism and nationalism, as well as the communism, seems to have engendered this kind of concept is something I feel very precarious and highly risky. So the backsliding of democracy, how can we be able to revive the democracy and try to make it more resilient? How the international community is responding, and what should Japan do? These are the things that I would like to talk about in a couple of minutes. Looking at the global trends, democracy is on the decline, as many people have already discussed. And as a consequence, ideology-wise, the world is divided. Different from the economy, there seems to be confrontation between authoritarianism and democracy. That has become more conspicuous. In 2022, the new strategic concept of NATO and the National Security Strategy of the United States, the new version, and Japan's new National Security Strategy, all of these documents have become more critical against Russia and China. So the division has deepened in the whole world. But at the same time, the world has not really been divided into two separate camps because of the rise of Global South. In the past, liberal democracy was right at the center of the whole international community. That age is already over. The GDP have come down from 70% to 40% for the G7. G7 today is a minority in the world. So that means regression of the power of influence. On the other hand, India and China and other countries in the Global South are increasing their influence. And that is what we need to consider. And lastly, looking at this reality, what should Japan do in diplomacy? We are trying to come down from more of a liberal democratic the rhetoric, because that may invite a division of the world. Rather than doing that, we should not isolate the Global South. We need to look at the interests of the Global South. Democratic values or human rights should not be strongly demanded like before. So in terms of rhetoric, we should be more reticent on these fronts. And rather than protecting democracy, we need to think more of an inclusive concept in terms of vision when we approach the other countries, mostly the Global South.
Thank you very much. In 1930s, the comparison to those days, how many times we consider, I think this is a very, very serious question, which we have to consider, but difficult to answer. Once again, I would like to go through the second round. And in this round, then what should we do? That is the question I want to ask. And also, if we fail in taking action, what could be the worst case scenario? That is the second question. Tsutsui Sensei, Professor Tsutsui, earlier you talked about democratic backsliding can be seen, but not necessarily. We don't have to be so negative about the backsliding of democracy. Still, there is a hope. I think that was a sort of connotation you had. So more specifically, in order to avoid further backsliding of democracy, what could you do now, immediately? That's the first question. And if we fail in taking those actions, in 10 years or so now, what could be the worst case scenario? What do we have to brace for? Thank you very much. Now, worst case scenario, the Third World War. Some people say that it's already starting now, but in my view, the World War III has not started yet. And I think that could be decided in coming 10 years by us. And more authoritarian countries will rise, and they make more solidarity, and Russia and North Korea cooperate more, and the U.S. recede, and Australia, Japan, and South Korea would try to resist that, and some contingency, unexpected conflict may occur. In order to prevent that, of course, there are various ways to do that in international politics, but I have to consider what Japan can do in this regard. As I said briefly already, the various countries in the world are seeing the rise of nationalistic populism. And I think people are frustrated with democracy, and that is seen here and there in the world. And also Japan, we see some of that too, because Prime Minister Kishida is losing approval rating. However, compared to other countries, such a dangerous type of division is not occurring in Japan yet. And South Korea, of course, Gi Wok-sin is better able to answer that, but in the elections in this year, including France too, we are concerned about the rise of far right. I think Japanese democracy is functioning quite well, and democracy itself is functioning well. But apart from that, Japanese society is peaceful, safe, and stable. And also, although economic growth rate is low, but to some extent, people's discontent is not gushing out, and they can live quite a good life. And therefore, there are positive elements in Japan too. However, Japanese people growing economically, that is a positive message to the world democratically, because other countries see democratic backsliding. So we can revive the confidence in democracy, and Japan can play a role in that. That is a big picture. But in order to give a message like this, since the second administration of Abe, the value-oriented diplomacy was pursued, and although Japan would not put the democracy at the forefront, however, in a more discreet way, Japan has been sending democratic messages to the world. The way Japan provide assistance through JICA, we are providing assistance to particularly Asian countries, and according to survey, Japan is most trusted compared to China as well, and Japan is enjoying a high level of support through such past years assistance. So I think we can communicate that to the world. It is important to defend democracy. That is a major message. And concretely, what could we do? For example, the rule setting is not, or agenda setting is not the forte of Japan in the world. Maybe Hosoya-san is involved in this. The free and open Indo-Pacific and Quad and CPTPP, Japan worked very hard to establish that. And in addition to that, In terms of global ranking, I don't know if that is meaningful. If we look at the global ranking, Japan has quite a big influence, and Keio University has such a ranking. I don't know by what criteria it is assessed, but Oxford and Cambridge comes high on the ranking. But I think Keio and other Japanese universities are very good as well. Maybe we shouldn't put too much focus on democracy when we take ranking. Maybe we can limit that to Asian countries, but I think we can go ahead with standard setting. For example, that level of infrastructure development, public health, and the safe society, and so forth. By these criteria, rather than using the democracy phrase per se, I think Japan can be involved in a standard setting and to ensure the value of democracy by communicating that to the international community.
ありがとう。
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for very concrete comments. So, Professor Kasuya, a similar question. What should be the measures to take, and if they do not work, what would be the worst scenario case? Professor Tsutsui, in relation to what he has mentioned, I agreed on certain points, but on the other hand, where Japan is doing good is there seems to be a time lag. What started in the United States, like the inequalities as well as the immigrants, and then Europe will suffer the same problems. But in Japan, we don't see those problems right now because we are an island, isolated nation. We don't welcome many immigrants, so we don't have the problem either. But what can Japan do to try to contribute to the whole world? So inclusive of that, please. Well, what you have mentioned at the very beginning, whether Japan is unique and different from the other countries or not, looking at the geography or the history or the social makeup, there could be different arguments, but I say that half is we are quite fortunate and lucky in terms of geography. But when it comes to the issue of immigrants, Japan will perhaps suffer the same issue as we have seen in the United States and Europe. So there is a time lag. What the challenges faced by the United States and Europe, those conflicts could also occur in Japan going forward. But on the other hand, Professor Tsutsui has mentioned many good points about Japan, that we are quite fortunate. I do agree. 1930s have been mentioned frequently, but I would like to go back even more. 1910s, Japan and Asia is what I would like to speak about. When we think about backsliding of democracy, especially in the academia, the biggest issue is the violation of freedom of expression as well as freedom of academic research. Like Hong Kong and China, our counterparts are suffering. I have been directly told by them, and in the press reports, for example, in India, journalists and researchers are being oppressed because of their anti-governmental the speeches or the articles, and they are being oppressed in many ways. And last week in NIKKEI Asia issue, this was also mentioned. Now, why we should look at 1910s? In 1911, the revolution happened in China. And Chinese revolutionary people have actually studied in Japan. The China, the Alliance Group was the name given that. Those revolutionaries in China have actually studied in Japan. They have formulated a group in Tokyo, the so-called Democracy Promotion Group, and Tokyo was a sanctuary for those people then. But looking at the whole world right now, this could be idealistic. But Japan can once again serve as a sanctuary. As Professor Tsutsui has mentioned, Japan, relatively speaking, we have a freedom of speech, and we also have academic freedom. So what can Japan provide? I believe sanctuary is one way that we can contribute.
その話を
Thank you very much. I remember listening to your remarks. From China, there are many wealthy people, or business people, or academic people are coming to Japan or evacuate from China. And Alibaba chairman was staying in Kawana Hotel, and he was playing a golf course there. But to that extent, in 1910s, that is a very interesting comparison, I thought. Now, Professor Shin, in your case, listening to the interventions from the panelists so far, in terms of priority, what would be the prioritized action, and what kind of effectiveness could we expect, impact could we expect from those prioritized actions? And also, if President Trump comes back to power, as you mentioned earlier, the implications to Russia and China. So what kind of impact could we expect from the U.S. elections upcoming? So please answer those questions.
Okay, so those are great and tough questions. So one thing I'd like to point out is what to do with the political polarization. I think this may not be a serious issue in Japan because you don't really have any regular change of power. So LDP is in power, so maybe, but I think like US and Korea in many parts of the world, this polarization is really, really serious. I mean, in our country, in the United States or in Korea, people don't to each other if they have different political views or ideological stance. It's getting very serious. And I think one factor is the impact of social media. So oftentimes we blame Steve Jobs to create a smartphone, and maybe we can blame Silicon Valley because so we produce a smartphone, Facebook, and in a lot of social media. So I'm not sure about in Japan, but I think at least in Korea or in the United States, the social media is really creating a lot of negative impact on politics. So what are you gonna do with the social media? I mean, like YouTube, for example. So I don't know how popular YouTube in Japan, but in Korea, very, very popular. And sometimes people not only formulate their views through YouTube, but also their views are confirmed or reinforced through YouTube channels. So I think big challenge is what you're gonna do with the social media. I mean, you can get rid of all the social media, but then can you introduce more measures to constrain the use of social media, but then also issue about freedom of speech and so on. So I don't have any good answer, but I think this is a very tough issue. And what if Trump back to power? So I mean, my colleague Mike McFall already provided very elegant answers. But certainly, I think it will have a huge impact on Japan and Korea because, as you know, American president has less influence on domestic politics and foreign policy, but he can have a lot of huge foreign policy. And looking back, Trump won. I think Japan was able to manage the alliance. I think thanks to Prime Minister Abe at the time. I think Abe maintained, good personal relationship with Trump. Playing golf and so on, right? So whether Kishida or different political leader, can do the same thing as Abe did? I'm not sure. I mean, you have the answer, but I think that was a very important factor that we shouldn't forget. For Korea, actually, ironically, I don't think Trump and Moon Jae-in at the time, the president, I don't think they liked each other. But ironically, they shared one common policy interest, which is North Korea, right? So that's why during that year, many summits between U.S. and North Korea, inter-Korea summits. So because of that policy interest in common, they were able to manage through the alliance. But now, very different time. As you know, the current Yoon government is taking very tough policy on North Korea. So let's assume that Trump back to power, if he continue or resume a re-engagement with North Korea, then it will create friction between Seoul and Washington. But on the other hand, he just forget about North Korea and endorse Seoul's policy, then it will intensify more conflict on the Korean Peninsula. So either way, it's not a good situation. So those parts I'm quite worrying. But I think taking a long-term view, I like to be more optimistic than pessimistic. And I don't think American democracy will break down. I mean, we'll go through a tough time. And like Mike, I'm also Democratic and I'm supporting Biden. But I have to confess that Biden hasn't been great global leader. So either way, I mean, even with Biden, we are kind of stuck with kind of weak American leadership. But after 4 years, I'm more optimistic. And also, China, Russia, even though they are making a lot of influence, they have a lot of troubles. I don't think China will continue to thrive. I think China has a lot of trouble, more than the United States. So probably 5-10 years from now, China, Russia may have more troubles. So that's why maybe in the next few years, we have to weather through. I think in Asia, they're saying that when there's showers, just avoid, okay? And then just wait a little bit because shower will disappear and pass away. Then try to come back to your work. So in a sense, maybe we are going through a very tough storm right now. But within 5-10 years, I'd like to be more optimistic. So how to weather through next few years, then maybe a big challenge. Okay.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you so much. So lastly but not least, Professor Hosoya, in 3 minutes, if possible, because we would like to have longer Q&A session. If you have anything to add or any last word in 3 minutes, please. Thank you. Liberal democracy, that it is still present and maintained. This is no longer to be taken for granted. You appreciate oxygen when there is no more oxygen. It's like that. So when democracy disappears, what will happen? 10 years ago, in the United Kingdom, the youth have participated in the Islamic State because they idolized Islamic State. But it was a hell experience for them, it seems. Now, the former East Germany, there was a Staages museum in underground. And 1 out of 10, there were always sort of tipping their neighbors to the Staages, to the police. So we need to think more seriously. What may happen when democracy is no longer there? Now, in Amazon, there is a TV hit drama. What happens when Nazis have won in victory? That was quite realistic, but very horrendous, horrific drama. There will be complacency. There are many problems in the society. If we ignore those problems, if we are too euphoric and being too victorious over the other regime, we would not be respected. So we need to always scrutinize both the strengths as well as weaknesses of the system. Now, when we have gone to the extreme in the past decades, people will run to the other side, the Nazism and fascism. We should learn that lesson. What was the name of that drama? Man in the High Castle. The High Castle. Man in the High Castle.
タイトルを忘れてしまったんですが、やっぱり
Actually, I saw that movie. I just forgot the title, but if you look at it at night, you get depressed. It's a quite a long story, season 4, actually. So you have to be prepared if you are really going to watch that. Please raise your hand if you have a question. Please identify yourself and affiliation before you speak. And if you have questions regarding the discussion from the previous session, we have Ambassador McFall and another speaker, Professor Tsuruoka here. So.
Thank you so much, Ali Kamita from Obayashi. Thank you for the panelists from the first session as well as the second session. It was extremely provocative and exciting. Being in the private sector for the last, 2 or 3 decades, I always think about what can, as an individual corporation, do to help. And I think you've mentioned a lot about military action, some of the deterrence and what does, provoke people, and how democracy doesn't necessarily go with economic success anymore. I think, however, there is a power in Japanese corporations and private sectors going out into Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth, and trying to give positive impression, positive investments, and building more relationships with the community. And what is your advice to companies like Obayashi that we can do to help bring more stability into this region?
要するに企業の役割ということです。
That means that role to be played by the private sector, including security and the democracy.
どうぞ最初に一番反応が早かったんで。You reacted first.
So I reacted because I'm glad you brought that question up. We have not talked enough about capitalism. We've been here 3 hours and we haven't mentioned the private sector. And I would just say 2 things. One, it is not the case, despite what is popularly viewed in conventional chatting about it, but it is not the case that democracies are performing worse than autocracies on many dimensions. First of all, the richest countries in the world are all democracies. The biggest economies in the world, yes, China's number 2, but 1 through 10 are all democracies. GDP per capita, they're all democracies. China is 55, Russia's 56, and I think we need to remember that. Because in this great power competition with China, there's the China model, right? The China model. I go to 4,000 conferences about the China model. I want the Japanese model to be discussed. I want the Korean model to be discussed. And in Ukraine, when I travel and work in Ukraine, I want them to think about after these horrendous wars, there are these other models as long as you develop democratic institutions, but also market institutions. I think our greatest advantage in this great power competition, I think our ideas are number 1, but our economic systems is number 2. And I think it has to be part of this equation. So, and we don't talk enough about it, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I think we need to focus more on it, not just in the aid and assistance, but about our models work better than their models, and we should study that and then educate the rest of the world about it, because the Chinese are educating the world about the China model, Japan, Korea, the United States, even the United States. We have a great economic model. We're doing better, and we should use that as part of our soft power toolkit when responding to the autocrats of the world.
ありがとうございます。はい。
Thank you very much. Now, You are representing Obayashigumi, right? And thank you very much for supporting this symposium. And if you could continue to do so, that would also lead to more prosperous capitalism and success as well. So thank you. Now, as you have mentioned yourself, the Japanese corporate activities, especially in the Southeast Asia, that there are many Japanese companies invested in Southeast Asia. I shouldn't perhaps have to say this in front of the Americans, but compared to the American companies or Chinese companies, Japanese companies enjoy better image amongst the Southeast Asians. That Japanese companies are trying to take deep roots in the society, trying to assimilate in the society and community, and more positive image. During the bubble economy, Japan was not getting that good image, but more recently, be it infrastructure development and so forth, and technology, Japan is far advanced, especially in the construction industry like yours, and also engineering. The high level of technology is also being celebrated. So in the free and open society is where innovation happens and the technology prowess can be improved. So in addition to what have already been spoken, that Japan has grown this much and we are prospering, and this is good because of democracy. And as a positive message, I hope that Japanese companies will continue to send this message.
その前に他に質問があればその
Before giving the floor to the panel, I would like to collect some questions from the floor. Any other questions? Yes. So we are not going to ask questions individually, but we would like to collect some questions. Thank you very much for various very valuable panelists at the SFC Center. I am studying, researching. I have two questions. Allow me to speak in Japanese. Maybe this is opposite to the topic of this session, but listening to Professor Tsutsui's looking at the index, I think the democracy versus autocracy, that kind of dichotomy, rather than, I think it's a question of degree. I think it is not clear-cut dichotomy in the world. So that was the impression I had. My question is that although it is not mentioned in the previous discussion, climate change, which is not related to ideology, this is the very serious issue for any country, climate change. In order to address and confront this issue, we have to increase the number of democratic countries, or maybe we have to go over such a dichotomy access. So I would like to ask you the question, how could we go about climate change issue? And secondly, I am specialized in economy and finances, but personally, I am interested in politics and security as well. Listening to this discussion, in addition to the discussion of the security and politics, I think we should add perspective of finance and economy to such a discussion. So if you have any views from that perspective, thank you.
もう地球が滅びちゃうかもしれないような問題。
Now, one thing is the big issue like climate change that could destroy the whole the world. And then the discussion on the autocracy and the democracy, the dividing the world, what can we do about that? And there was another point, yes, maybe we should collect the questions first. So another person? Thank you very much for the valuable discussion. I am with Mitsui Sumitomo Bank. My name is Tomizawa. I have just one question. Professor Tsutsui, what you have asserted is something that I would like to follow up on. Now, trying to further spread democracy, there could be certain countries who would drop out, like Niger in sub-Saharan region, like the French have withdrawn and U.S. bases have withdrawn, and authoritarian countries like Russia and China are coming in instead. But cost-wise, you have to choose. If you compare Taiwan and the other countries, perhaps countries would commit to Taiwan rather than the other countries. It is not just ideology. You should also think about monetary costs involved, but that could invite a bad the spiral. Now, let me try to summarize. The role to be played by the companies, I understand that economic and financial community can also play a role, and also corporations can also play a role. And then another question is the big issues like climate change, and that could be contradicting with the question of democracy versus authoritarianism. And then there are certain regions that could always be ignored or neglected, like the sub-Saharan region. You could answer any of these issues. So, Professor Tsutsui, if you could give the others the priority first. So, Professor Kasuya, would you like to start?
Thank you very much for the questions. There are many questions that I am not able to answer. You don't have to answer all the questions because of the time constraints. You can pick up some questions you want to answer. Yes, regarding the role to be played by companies and looking around Southeast Asia, as Professor Tsutsui said earlier too, that from the perspective of human resource development, we want to increase human resources with liberalism oriented. And also regarding the big issues like climate change, so far, the conventionally multilateral international organizations have played a central role. However, looking at the reality, there are things that can be done by the government and things that can be done by the private sector. And then regarding those things that can be done by the private sector, we don't have to talk about democracy or autocracy, and there is no dichotomy when it comes to the private sector. And also African countries which will be outside of such assistance and so forth. I am also studying the democracy backsliding. The American companies spreading propaganda message and make investment in Africa. And I think that is very tactful. So if you look at this, I become pessimistic about such a Chinese practice. Now, for example, Japan's ODA can be expanded to these countries. And there are some people who are advocating abolishing Japan's ODA. But personally speaking, I hope that the ODA should continue by the Japanese government. Compared to bubble economy period, ODA amount declined very much.
Professor Shin, please.
Okay, thank you. Those are good questions. One thing I wanted to highlight is that promoting or recovering from democratic backsliding, it's not easy process. Also, politicians play important role, but you just can't count on politicians. I think private sector, maybe NGOs, we academics, we can all work together to promote in a democracy. Education also very important. I mentioned about the negative impacts of social media. Certainly we can educate young people. So, in a sense, we have to create a partnership, maybe between government, NGOs, and private sector, and academic institutions. And I think this kind of dialogue is very important. And I don't expect any recovery to be very quick. It will be very protracted in a process. We need the patience. We need our effort to be continued. So I think that's why, even though it's a difficult task, I like to be more optimistic. And we built strong institutions, and it had a lot of challenges. But I think we will survive. I mean, if not every country, but I think many advanced countries like maybe U.S. and Japan, Korea, I think they will survive. And then I think there will be opportunity to even enhance liberal democracy. But to that happen, I think we need a partnership among different sectors in society. It's not only job by politicians, private sector, academics, and NGOs all can play an important role. So that's sort of my conviction, and then I think this kind of dialogue is very important.
ありがとうございます。細谷先生。
Professor Hosoya, thank you. The company's role, I feel in the following way. Yamamoto Tadashi, who passed away some time ago, in the post-World War II, through private sector exchanges, philanthropic approach was taken by him. And Japanese company leaders are less quite reluctant to do philanthropy activities. For example, in order to maintain nature and in order to, just like that, we have to build democracy. We have to have a cooperation from various companies, like Obayashi is supporting our event, and also the Keio, KSC also supported by private sector companies as well. On the other hand, in Afghanistan, the literacy is very low. As a result of that, those who cannot read things go to mosques to listen to clerks and clergy to make a political decision. And it is quite difficult for them to take independent decision. That is why the foreign countries' propaganda penetrate into those countries, and also it is easy for religious propaganda to take root in those society. Therefore, democracy is important. If that's the case, then the basis or the foundation to support a democracy has to be provided, including education, media, and also raising literacy is one approach. And the foundation to support a democracy in the society has to be built, including participation of private sector companies and the government as well. I think that is essential.
8分
Thank you very much. We still have 8 minutes left, so we can go another round of questions, please. Yes, the person over there and here as well. Thank you very much for good discussion. My name is Matsuhara. I'm the freshman at Keio University. I am studying political science. Now, the importance of liberal democracy, it is very important, but in Japan and the United States should be more forthcoming in trying to spread these concepts. And the people need to understand the values of liberal democracy first and foremost. Now, you are in the academic field, and you are also involved in teaching students as well. So for the students to understand better on liberal democracy, what kind of education should be done is my question. Another question over there.
マイクが来るんでちょっと待ってください。
Please wait for the microphone, because we have only one microphone. Please wait.
Thank you for the great discussion and also the opportunity. So until now, we are keep talking about the clear authoritarian and also very clear democracy country. But nowadays, I also see the phenomenon about authoritarian being packaged as a democracy country. Let's mention 2 countries in Southeast Asia, like the Philippines and also Indonesia. So, how are you going to solve or tackle this Latin authoritarian style. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。まさにそこに私が加えたいと思ったのはシンガポールもそうかもしれない。
I also wanted to add Singapore as well to the group. I would also like to add Singapore to the group of nations that you have mentioned. Now, one was about education, and then you mentioned about Indonesia, Singapore, those countries which are not belonging to either camp. So 1 minute each to the panelists, and Professor Ambassador McFall, as well as Professor Tsuruka, if you have any comments, please add later. Now, about authoritarian and democracy. That is true, very true. As Professor Higashijima at University of Tokyo, I believe he has written a book very recently. Is it really democracy at all, or is it authoritarianism? Both are coming closer, actually. The line is blurred between the two. So we need to be watchful about this. Authoritarian is no longer a statist country, not trying to oppress people. That would no longer hold, because democracy is spreading on the ground. So the human rights value seems to be made more important, and people who are outright asking for those rights. So oppressive type of statism no longer can survive, and that is very good. Now, at Stanford University, I do teach class. I teach on the international human rights issue. And more recently, at Stanford, the STEM education, because it is right next to Silicon Valley. So there are many people who do not have been educated on ethics with startup companies, and that has become highly problematic. So STEM is important, but values are also important to be inculcated. So the program has been newly started at Stanford.
というふうに思いました。
I thought it was difficult to cover both topics in 1 minute, so you can choose one. From my perspective, I would like to skip the education on politics. I want to talk about the gray zone political system. As you know, currently in political science, particularly comparative politics, it is very important for the analytical purposes. However, now we are talking about diplomatic issue. Now, perhaps Hosoya Sensei better answers this question, but particularly gray zone countries, particularly India, the Philippines, these are very important countries in international geopolitics, and that is why domestic authoritarian elements, i.e. United States, ignoring the U.S. and countries try to tie up with these authoritarian countries. I think this is something that civil society has to closely watch.
Professor Shin, please.
Briefly about education, I think the main thing is try to learn from history. I think Japan is a very clear case. I mean, you know what happened in 1930s and 40s, but also what happened after 1945. So it's a very clear example, you know, what you can learn from history. So I think we should discuss those issues in classroom than trying to learn from history.
はい、ありがとうございます。じゃあ細谷先生お願いします。
Hosoya Sensei. Yes, sorry. There is a Institute of Geoeconomic Studies, and this year we wrote an article that this year is an election year, but one tendency we see is among democratic countries, there is a tendency tilting toward authoritarianism. And Higashijima-san's name was mentioned. However, like Putin, there is a two trends, and there is a blurred borderline, and that is what we wrote. And regarding the education on politics, political science, digital Lainism, digital authoritarianism is often talked about. Because of the advent of digital technology, it's easier for the government to supervise and survey the society. So it is easier for the government to control the society. In the past, internet was set to liberate people. However, the government is taking advantage of this technology to supervise the citizens. And China is exporting this technology to Africa too. So for the purpose of surveillance, digital technology is being used.
今50分で
That was superb. So it is right on the dot. It is 5:50. And sorry for the poor management by myself. It was too quick and too short, but I was able to have different views from different people. Now, more on security as well as military issues. That was the focus of session 1. But the session 2, what is the operating system for the whole world? The democracy. We were able to discuss more widely. So I believe we were able to share the different points of view. So once again, a big hand for all the panelists. Thank you.